Welcome to Old Path and our Monday studies through the Old Testament. We are currently in the book of Isaiah, get to the third chapter. And though we usually have these posted on Mondays, I got back in town from Israel on Sunday, and I'm still trying to acclimate. So had a pretty good amount of jet lag for the first 24 to 36 hours. And so I put off the recording of this until today, so this being Tuesday. But I will still put it up as a Monday just so that it's an easy thing for people to be able to find. And so just to put it out there as for information, there were some people who really wanted to try to do this in springtime. We had a number of people who were going to join this trip, but because of concerns about safety and a number of other items, many decided to drop out of this one. So if you're interested, first of all, it was the one thing I can say, this trip was fantastic as far as the lack of crowds. It was amazing to be able to get to places with hardly anyone there. We never see that, which was a blessing to us who had to go see it, but it is a real problem for those in Israel. The country is suffering desperately under this. People are not working because it's so dependent on travel, but that does look to be coming back around. And we are putting together a trip for this springtime. So we're planning to go there in April, and I really strongly encourage you to do that, mainly because, first of all, they could really use the help, but also having now been there in the fall, I do prefer the spring. And so that was my first trip there in the fall, but I do like the springtime better. The weather's very much the same, but I'm already finding out by talking with people on the ground that tours are starting to book for October, which is really kind of the first time that you can get there after the fall feasts have happened. If you go earlier, before they all start, you can sometimes get some warmer weather in September, and as it was, we were hitting 80s while we were there. So anyhow, it was a marvelous trip, and it's never a disappointment to go to Israel. And so if you're interested in this trip, I'm still waiting on all the details for it and the pricing, and I would love to discuss it with you if you have any questions about it. It is indeed it's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of a thing, mainly because of what you learn and how it just changes the way that you read the text. So we're again, planning to put this together, and we learned a couple of things on this one. Now that the people are starting to travel from other parts of the country to come and be a part of the things that we do. It used to all be out of California when I was there, but now we're getting from all over the place, and that created a bit of a problem. So we've come up with, I think, a solution for it, and I'd love to be able to talk with you about it. If you have any interest in this, I can talk to you by email or by phone and get you all of the details on that. So springtime next year, April the 20th, I believe, is what we're looking at as a departure date, and I'd love to give you some details on it. Now, one thing that I want to deal with on the apologetic side of things. At the end of this, we will do something on a question that I've heard said over the years, but I've noticed a few people, it seems like all at once, they're talking about Jesus being a socialist, mainly because of what's going to go on in New York. I'm talking to you on Election Day 2025, and unless something really unforeseen happens, the people of New York City are going to vote in a socialist who's really much more of a communist than anything else. The idea of taking over the means of production and a number of other crazy things this guy's wanting to do. Most of it he'll never even be able to get because he has to get complicit help from the state and from the federal government, and he's in for a rude awakening. But anyhow, I want to tackle that question because I think it's an interesting one, and one that's very easy to answer according to the scripture, and it is not what some people think. So we're going to tackle that question. I think it's an important one for us to do, but we will get to chapter 3 today, and this is a pretty fascinating chapter to go through, mainly because it really does jump back in the timeline to what will be a very near future kind of an event. So we've looked at what was in chapter 2, and this is one of the important things that we want to do with Scripture, and you hear me say it often. When we're studying the Scripture and we're looking at a particular thing that speaks about some event that is future. So all of chapter 2 had not happened yet. Chapter 3, not happened yet. Chapter 2, we started to look through it and say, from our perspective, it doesn't really even fit anything historical. And so we would say that there was the near fulfillment of some of the stuff could have fit what would have happened from the return to the Babylonian captivity and when God does the things that he does. But if you're going to make it fit where it has no holes historically, and it really fulfilled just like it was saying it was going to, the only place that fits is future. What we're studying today, it jumps back in the timeline, and we can look at it, I believe, as a historical event that has taken place. So chapter 3, I believe, is speaking about the Babylonian captivity because it fits. There aren't holes in that, and there aren't some things in this that really are left unresolved. We know that simply because of the history of it. So if you want to start looking at where this could have been taking place, start in the book of Chronicles or in the book of Second Kings, Second Chronicles, where you start to read about the kings from, say, Ahaz onward. And that's going to help you to understand what it was like. I'm going to give you some details because there's something that's prophesied about what would happen prior to the Babylonian captivity, and all of it fits. Now, the only time that Jerusalem is going to have the kind of problems that it does here really doesn't fit Jesus's time. And some would say that perhaps when the nations come against it, nations plural, in the tribulation, that perhaps it's going on there. But we really don't have a way of seeing from any of the prophetic passages about that time that there would be any kind of rulers and leaders and people in Jerusalem that would be able to fit the description here. So once again, we want to take a particular passage and we want to find where it fits historically. And if it doesn't fit historically, we want to be able to say, then it must still be future. And then from that, we can start looking at what do we have of other places in the scriptures where it might speak of end times types of things, maybe even future to our time, and see if there's something that really agrees with that view in other writings of other prophets. And so that's a pretty easy thing for us to do with this and with the last chapter. So what you're seeing Isaiah say here is something that is kind of common, I guess you could say. It's something that's not really left unresolved in history, and the other prophets were saying very similar things to the nation. And really in focus here is Jerusalem and Judah. We have that from the very first couple of verses of the book, and so we know that the audience, the intended audience, is that of Jerusalem in particular, and Judah as far as the tribes. It's the southern tribes that are being mentioned here. So what that is, comprised of two of the tribes being Benjamin and Judah, and whoever would have escaped to the southern tribes when the Assyrians came calling. So by the time that he's talking about all these things, that will have already taken place, and the people will have been there, and they're going to fall into the same corruption that happened up in the north. So it's with that as kind of the historical backdrop in all of this that we kind of come into the text. So let's turn to chapter 3, and let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. We have kind of a lengthy chapter, but I'd like to try to get through it. It's not all that lengthy. It's 26 verses, but I would like to try to get through it all in one bite, mainly because of how it's broken down, and there's really no reason to break it up. We can get through it without really kind of having too much trouble all in one session. So there's a breakdown in actually the way that the chapter is set. What you have in verses 1 to 9 is what he says is going to be taking place. And he really kind of gives you the cause of it as well. By verse 10, there is a message for those who are walking rightly before God, and yet it is the foretelling of the difficulties that are to come. But by the time you get to verse 16 through the end of the chapter, he has been addressing the elites among the nation, from the rulers to the princes to all of these skilled people. And it's talking about how no matter what they have, it's going to be stripped away. The second part of this is reserved for the women and the things that they are doing. And ultimately, all of this is going to happen to them because of their rebellion that they've had against God. So it's a pretty sobering thing that's being said here. It's a very serious matter, needless to say. And we can look back historically and say, when the Babylonians came calling, this is what they found. And let's remember that most of the things that they are doing here are expressly spoken against in the law itself. So people who would be governed according to what the books of Moses would have said, remember the things that Moses was writing when they were in their time of their captivity, in their 40 years after their captivity in Egypt, before they came into the land. There were so many things that God had spoken through Moses saying, when you get into the land, here is what you will do. And the things that they were doing were so counter to that, but you can see all of the pagan influences that were happening around the nation. And God holds them accountable for it. That's why all this happened. So there are a number of contributing factors to why the Babylonians were able to conquer them. And you can point to a number of different things where you could see that God would say, this is why, this is why, this is why. It really is kind of just, all in all, it's ultimately rebellion. Why is it that it was for the 70 years? Was part of that rebellion of not taking care of the land as they were told to, and so God penalizes them for every year that they didn't do that. For 70 cycles, they didn't give the land rest. We get that at the end of 2 Chronicles, the last chapter, last few verses. So that helps us to understand why all of this was going to take place. What Isaiah is doing is telling them about something that is going to take place and the cause for it, how it's going to look, who is going to be affected, and again, he holds them accountable. It's just mind-blowing when you stop to think about it, that Isaiah is able to tell them these things well in advance of the events, and he tells them why. God speaks to them and tells them why all of this is going to happen, and it still happens nonetheless, because he sent prophets, Isaiah right there at the top of them, all saying the same things about what's about to happen. And in direct eyesight to what's being said here is all of the rulers, the kings and the people who were in charge are the ones who are being indicted about this for the way that they're doing things. And they're being told, this is what's going to happen to the nation because of you. And rather than repent of it, they continue going straight forward with it, and their corruption just becomes total. So, chapter 3, let's have a word of prayer, and we'll take a look at the text. Father, we thank you for the time that we can spend seeking you out in your word. And we pray, God, that you would help us to understand why these things are important. Help us to understand the history of it, of course, and why does it apply to them. But as we do with these historical events, why would this be of importance to us here in the church, and what things can be learned as we study through these things, making application, knowing that this is not the church's history, this is Israel's history, and yet so much can be learned about taking our eyes off of you as they did, and what can end up happening for people who should be known by your name and yet pursue other things. So, God, I pray that you would be glorified in what we do and open our hearts and our minds of understanding that we could grasp the importance of this and why we should care. So we give you thanks and praise in Jesus' name. All right. So chapter 3, the first verse really kind of just helps to, I guess you can kind of say, settle who is in speaking here and what he's about to do. So this is to give them pause and make them realize this is a serious matter considering how God addresses this. So it says, "For behold, the Lord of hosts, takes away from Jerusalem and Judah the stock and the store, the whole supply of bread, the whole supply of water." Now, that is just the day-to-day sustenance of things. Now, this idea of taking away, it means that they're going to be put away, if you will, or they're going to be displaced. And so we all know that that happens. Remember, we're looking at this as something that is being spoken of as though it has already taken place. But at the time Isaiah writes it, it's written as a prophecy. This is all stuff that's going on right there in their midst, but it's going to take generations before it happens. And we'll see that here in just a moment as we look through this. As I've already put out in the previous times we've been studying this, Isaiah's ministry covers 4 kings. And so the first one, I believe it would be at the tail end of Uzziah. And then, of course, there is Jotham, and then Ahaz, and then Hezekiah. Ahaz is the bad guy, and Ahaz is the one who had all kinds of problems in his time. He didn't trust the Lord. He depended on foreign nations. He was conquered by foreign nations, a foreign nation, Syria in that case, because he had rebelled against God and they were able to defeat him. So he's thinking, well, if they can defeat me, then my God is not able. Theirs is. And so it's just an ugly, ugly situation. So there were problems that were happening during Ahaz's time, but the next king after him, Hezekiah, that Isaiah was there for, again, a very solid king. So 3 of the 4 kings that spanned the ministry of Isaiah are identified as good kings. They did what was right in the sight of the Lord. Certainly not perfect, but they were not like the Ahazes of the world. So after Hezekiah, you have one good king. Manasseh is a complete disaster after Hezekiah, though he repents in the end. Josiah comes in and is wonderful. Everyone after him is just making the problem worse. So really, really interesting what's being presented here. And again, being able to match it up with history. See, we got 2,700 years of hindsight, just using round figures. We got 2,700 years ultimately of hindsight in this, and we're able to look back and see the things that had taken place after Isaiah wrote this, and we have a good idea of when he was speaking about historically just based on those events. So again, start looking at everything from Ahaz onward when you look at the text, and see what happened in that succession of kings, and you'll see exactly what had taken place. What is being prophesied here is what happened to them. So in chapter 3, once again, we read this, that it is God who's going to do this. The Lord of hosts, this is his action. He's going to do these things, and we are told why. Now, he doesn't do this willy-nilly. Now, again, we just got back from Israel. And we look at one place after another, and it was funny. Our tour guide said something that just was comical, and I had to point it out to everyone. When we look at the Temple Mount, and we look at the place where the Dome of the Rock is, that place in Jerusalem that everybody is concerned about, and we look at the Temple Mount, the walls around that big square thing where that golden dome's in the middle, and the black mosque known as Al-Aqsa is on the southern side. From you, it's the southern side. So anyway, all the walls that are there, the ones that are up at the top are put up by the Ottomans. And so they're basically 500 years old. Let's just use round figures. Roughly 500 years old. And our tour guide pointed out and said, those are much more recent. Those are 500 years. Those are recent history. And I just chuckled in my mind thinking, where do we go back 500 years in our country, the United States, and find any kind of ruins? You have to look long and hard to find anything that you can say is legitimately 500 years or older. And that's seen as more modern history to them, mainly because we went to places with history that goes back 4,000 years. We're looking at bits and pieces in the nation of Israel that have ruins that go back that far. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. And so we have the ability to go back and look at these events that had taken place, again, like 2,600, 2,700 years back. And the evidence of it is right there. So this is something that's being spoken of. This is going to take place. God will take away their ability just for the day-to-day of things. That's where it begins. Now he says this. Now, here's what else will be taken away. Now, when he says the stock in the store, the things that would be on the shelves, if you will, and then even the bread and water, the day-to-day sustenance of things. Interestingly enough, it was a time when the Assyrians were coming, and we walked through this tunnel. It was dug at the decree of Hezekiah, knowing that they could not really kind of endure any kind of a siege because they didn't have a water source. So he directs people to dig from 2 sides, and they want to bring water from the Gihon spring outside of the city walls into a place of collection. We call it the Pool of Siloam. And water flowed through that tunnel. So they would have a source of water, even when there would be a time if the Assyrians came all the way to Jerusalem, which they ultimately did, there was at least a water source. And, depending on the number of inhabitants and all of that and how much farmland, they could probably have endured a siege for quite some time. But again, the Assyrians could have ultimately conquered. And so all the taunts that were going on that we'll get to, eventually, could very easily have taken place. And so we do get a chance to read through some of that here in this text. So in the book of Isaiah when I say the text. So anyhow, we were able to see that the idea that even the things that could have sustained life, those will be ultimately cut off at some point. Didn't happen during the Assyrians. It did happen at the time of the Babylonians, and the Babylonians were able to conquer the city regardless of the fact that they had a water source, so which is still there today. Our people walked through it. So it says now, what will also happen at that time? The mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, the diviner and the elder. And the diviner and the elder, there's views on what this means. Is it really speaking more of the occultic kind of things, or the ones who are able to determine what it is that God is speaking, kind of along the lines of the prophet? But if there's a real problem with what's taking place there, and it really kind of happens from the top, it has every reason for us to believe that he's really starting to go into what would be the people who even start to do things of the occult, and incorporating that into the corporate worship of the nation. It was happening all throughout the country elsewhere. Why not in Jerusalem? And so this stuff was already going on. But the day's coming when God is taking this away. Remember, that's the operative point. God is taking these things away. The nation will be displaced, and he's going to depose them. They will be, there's a judgment that's coming, and they're going to be removed. And it will incorporate all of these people. This would be seen as kind of the elites. So the elite warriors, the people that are in all kinds of places of society, the higher-ups, if you will, because they're contrasted by another group that we'll get to it here in a little bit. So the captain of the 50 and the honorable man, the counselor and the skillful artisan, and even the expert enchanter, or the person that is some would say that the translation of this could be the orators, or even the people who are able to do things as far as charms are concerned. It's not a very common used word as far as this is concerned. The enchanter, it could be just the charmer. It's only used 5 times in the Old Testament, and it really kind of leaves a lot of speculation. However, if we look at the overall problem and what God identifies here, there was occultic practices happening all throughout, and it was leading the people away from the proper worship of the Lord to other things. So the idea that there would be an occultic element to what was taking place of the corporate worship and why God would judge it, you would expect this kind of stuff going on. Now, it's not that he's giving these lists of things because these are the only reasons. His point is, all the people who have all of these positions, these are, again, the more prominent in the nation, these are the people that there is a problem with them, and they're all going to be taken away, starting with the things on the shelves, the day-to-day sustenance of things, and it's going to affect everyone, beginning at the top. That's his point here. I will give children to be their princes and babes to rule over them. The people will be oppressed, everyone by one another, and everyone by his neighbor. The child will be insolent towards the elder, and the base towards the honorable. So verse 4, that he says that he would give children as their princes and babes to rule over them. The point is, it's not going to be the people with experience. It's not going to be the people who have wisdom. It's rather going to be children, and they're going to act like children. Now, it's not as much necessarily children as like infants, though we have a couple of them that are quite young when they begin. Others that will be more in their 20s, but they're not seen as the elders. These are not seen as the people who have been seasoned at this. Again, these are kings that follow their fathers, so they've been used to being raised around hardly the normal of life. They don't have any kind of experience in this. So let me give you a rundown of that. When you look at the kings, from Hezekiah was 12, Manasseh was 12 when he became the king. Ammon after him was 22. Josiah was 8. Jehoahaz was 23. Jehoiakim 25. Jehoiachin 18, and Zedekiah, the last of the kings, was 21. So you have a fulfillment in the kings that followed from the time that he wrote this, if we begin with Hezekiah. So none of them were, I'm sorry, I said Hezekiah at 12. I want to just start with Manasseh. From Hezekiah's time, a good king who followed Ahaz, really, I believe when Isaiah was writing this portion, what we have is, from his time on, these are just young men, if not complete children, again, in Josiah's case. And yet Josiah did wonderful things as a child because he had obviously he must have had good counsel around him. But when it all comes to pass at the end, after Josiah, those ones that I mentioned, when it comes to Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, Zedekiah, those four in succession were young people when they started, and they were incredibly wicked, and finally God said enough. So that's when it all ultimately happened, and what you have in these kings were men who did not savor the things of God. They were there when everything fell apart, and ultimately they were the cause of it. And so it was just going to continue to go downward. Now, I mentioned this before, and interestingly enough, I mentioned this to our tour guide when we were in Israel, that we think of the sacrificing of the children in a valley known as the Hinnom. We drive through it. We see it a number of times in our trip when we're in Jerusalem. But it's known as the Valley of Gehenna, or Hinnom, the Hinnom Valley. It's kind of just to the south and to the west of the temple. And so still there, that was where they were sacrificing their children, just these unbelievably wicked and evil things that were taking place. And yet all that stuff was happening not just in Manasseh's time. That's the guy who gets credited with it more than anything else. But we already see from the history of Ahaz, that was happening in his time. It wasn't happening during Hezekiah, but it came back around at Manasseh. So we go on and we read, I will give children to be their princes, and babes will rule over them. It's just a way of saying these young, inexperienced people who have no wisdom are going to be ruling over the people, the kinds that have already been mentioned. The ones that are the artisans, the ones that are the captains, the ones that are, these important people who really are the more types that you would want to be able to lead if they were godly rather than these ungodly kids. Well, it says, the people are going to be oppressed, every one by another. So the people will turn on themselves and they'll turn upon one another. Remember, everything that we read here in verse 5 is completely counter to what is expected in the law. Some of these things, if people did them and they were living in strict accordance to the law, children rebelling against their parents and becoming insolent, that was a punishable by death offense. That's pretty heavy stuff. Well, this shows just how far from God's law the people were no longer being governed that way at all. They had become just like the pagans around them, which was God's caution to begin with. The people will be oppressed, everyone by another, everyone by his neighbor. The child will be insolent towards the elder, and the base towards the honorable. So everything is turned in the total opposite way. It was the honorable who was supposed to set their pattern, that the base person, the person who's just not in any way reflective of what it would be to be one of God's children, one of the people of the nation, those people were supposed to be and set the example. Here, those base people are oppressing the honorable. And of course, as we see just before that, the child being insolent towards the elder, the total opposite. I watched this happen too in our trip while we were there, and just watching a young kid clearly speaking, he was speaking Hebrew, and one of the tour guides we know from another group was in the elevator, and the door opened. Our elevator was pretty full, and it was a bunch of young kids who had been down at the pool. One still had a drink in his hand, and one of his friends thought it'd be funny to push him into the elevator, and so another guy jumps in with him. And the old man behind me, the elderly man, was basically saying, "What are you doing?" We couldn't understood what they said, but it was pretty obvious. And this kid turns around and just goes off on this guy. And just incredibly disrespectful. Of course, he'd been drinking, so he was a complete nuisance. And once they finally got off, of course, he throws something from outside, I think it was a trash can, throws it in at us in the elevator as the door is closing. And the man behind us apologized for the condition of that and what we had to watch. The screaming and yelling was like deafening inside that elevator for 5 floors. But you're watching it take place, to watch those kind of things happening, and you see, boy, history repeats itself. Well, in this case, it says, now, at that point, another thing that will be taking place, when a man takes hold of his brother in the house of his father, saying, "You have clothing, you be our ruler, and let these ruins be under your power." So it'll be so bad, people are looking for anyone to take control of things. So they'll look at somebody who looks as though they have something, and they'll say, you've got more than I do. Obviously, this is something that you should be able to oversee. They're going to be that desperate that they would cling to anything to try to stay off what's coming. And so it says, and in that day, that person that you say, hey, you've got clothing, you rule over us. That person's going to say, I cannot cure your ills, for in my house is neither food nor clothing. Do not make me a ruler of the people. So there's going to be that level of chaos, that somebody who looks like they have some kind of substance, just in the material sense, would be a good candidate to rule the people, nothing about the character. And so that person is going to say, I'm not who you think I am. And the chaos of this just shows that there's nobody that you would say, in a case like this, what you'd want to say, clearly this is because of our rebellion against God. Let's find a godly person to rule over us. That's not even in their minds. That just shows you how bad the corruption will be by the time that Nebuchadnezzar comes. And this was, again, something that I wanted to point out. We saw ruins everywhere when we were in Israel. And I said this to the group. If from the time of Moses and then Joshua, who ultimately brought them in, if every successive person was sought from, at the time when Joshua was ready to go, the nation could very well have gone before the Lord and had the priests and everybody do what they were supposed to do and go before the Lord and say, Lord, will you choose our next Joshua? And that could have happened in a line of succession, and that would be going on for, indefinitely. But we know the history, and of course now, as far as the church is concerned, Jesus has now come into this reality, so it wouldn't be necessarily the same now. But they would have and should have been invincible, and who knows what it would have been like at the time that Jesus comes onto the scene. But of course, we look back on that as historical. We just know what the promises that God gave were. It was going to be forever with them. But nonetheless, it wasn't, and it was more often than not the opposite of what God wanted and designed for them because of their rebellion. But just remember, they would have been invincible. They would have never been in this place had it not been for their insubordinance, and God deals with that as he speaks to them about this. So, in verse 8 rather, it says this, for Jerusalem stumbled and Judah is fallen. And the stumbling is, of course, it's of course a spiritual matter. And again, let me remind you, as we read this, none of this has taken place, but he's speaking about it as absolute fact, as though it has already taken place. It is that sure. Why? Because God knows it's going to be like this. He knows what's going to happen from the time that Isaiah is writing until he finally judges the nation. It's inevitable because he already knows what they're going to do. He knows what he has offered. He knows that they will continue to reject. So he's able to speak about future things as though they've already taken place. So Jerusalem has stumbled and Judah is fallen because of their tongue and their doings that are against the Lord, to provoke the eyes of his glory. So not only what they say, but what they do is a provocation to God, which ultimately means that everything that he told them to do in his law had been rejected. They had done the polar opposite. As a result of that, the end result should be obvious. What's going to take place next? If God gives to them, which he did in the law, here's how to walk rightly and honorably before me, and he puts it in writing. The books of Moses tell them what they're supposed to do. They have everything that they need in order to walk rightly. Instead, they choose to rebel, and here God says everything that they say and everything that they do is a provocation. Look at this, the next part, because here's the thing where it becomes, why do we read this history? Why is it so important? Because here is some universal truth that's going on. If God's people in the modern day, we would call the church, let's just say that that's the covenant that we're thinking about, the church, there's many people who call themselves Christians. There's churches that absolutely reject even some of the most basic tenets of Christianity, and those are going to be ripe for judgment. So what they say and what they do, they claim to be one thing, and yet they are another by their actions and by their words. So we see the churches that are affirming all kinds of social things that God has spoken against, and yet the church embraces it. They deny the most basic of things in the church that is written for us in the scriptures. They ignore those things. And instead, it's just a place where people get together, they can feel good about themselves and say, we go to church, and yet God looks at them and says, I have no idea what you think you're doing, but we're not even on the same page here. So it's kind of like what you see with Laodicea. They think everything's great. Laodicea is told, you are blind and naked and poor. You think that you're rich and that you got everything going on, but you are mistaken. Same kind of a situation here. Well, look at what's said in verse 9. The look on their countenance witness against them. So here's what God says. When he looks at them, all you have to do is look at their face. They know what's going on is wrong, and yet they don't have any willingness to do anything against them. It's a witness against them. And they declare their sin as Sodom did. Means that they proclaim it, they embrace it, they flaunt it. It's everywhere to be seen. So there's no shame in them. They don't try to conceal what they're doing. They live openly in their rebellion. So he says, they don't hide it. He says, woe to their soul, what it is their being. For they have brought this evil upon themselves. So very important. Once again, here's the thing, that this is one of those places where I'd love to point the Calvinist who believes that God's the one who decrees everything, even up to the point of who's going to be saved and who's not going to be saved. Do you notice where he puts the problem here? Do you notice how he holds the people accountable for their willfulness in doing what they've done? He doesn't show himself as being the cause of their judgment. He shows their judgment as being brought about by their rebellion, period. So this is why. This is all about accountability. When these things come to pass, don't be surprised. God already said it, and this is his judgment against you for your rebellion. This is what Isaiah is telling to the people. What would be good for the church to look at this and say, is that something that we would think he would do again if the church found themselves in the place of being wayward before him? Well, here's what he says. Now, in verse 10, say to the righteous. Now, there's a question whether or not this is God saying to Isaac. Oh my gosh, Isaiah. Is this God saying to Isaiah, you tell the people? Or is this Isaiah saying to the leadership, you tell the people? In either case, this should go down to the next group of people. And again, in the language here, there's disagreement on it. But either way, this is God communicating through the means of whether it be Isaiah or the priesthood or whoever's in charge. Make sure the people know this. So, say to the righteous that it shall be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. But woe to the wicked, it shall be ill with them or with him, for the reward of his hands shall be given to him. So this is an interesting thing because, once again, when this all fell apart, we know that not everyone was taken to Babylon. When we look at what Jeremiah was not sent to Babylon. So some were able to escape. But the point is, when all of this calamity happens to some degree or another, the people who have been right before God, he would find a way. He would provide a way, I should say, for them to have something, though nonetheless the whole nation would be dissolved and taken away in their captivity. And whoever remains behind does not have a priesthood, does not have a temple, does not have any of those things. This will be the destruction of Solomon's temple when Nebuchadnezzar ultimately comes. So really, really important that we catch that. Now he says, woe to the wicked, of course, just as he said, it's a good thing. I'll take care of the righteous, but woe to the wicked. Now, as for my people, children are their oppressors and women rule over them. So once again, this is the idea that the people that will be raised up, like we see here in the kings that are mentioned, the people who are there around them, they're going to be infested by those people who give them bad counsel. Women at this point is mentioned as that. Now, whether it's mothers or whether it's the women who would corrupt them through their idolatry and all the rest. Think Solomon. That's what happened with him. So he says, oh, my people, those who lead you, cause you to err and to destroy the way of your paths. So you're following the wrong people. It's one thing that if they're in positions of power, you can't do anything about that, but you don't have to follow their corruption. So there's a great application for us today. There are people who are in charge of us throughout our country, and these are not godly people. It's not something that we would ever want to emulate. In fact, we would want to look at what they do in their rebellion against God and say we would propose to do the opposite and not be like them. Well, once again, we are talking about a very select group of people here. We are talking about the tribes of Israel, the sons of Jacob. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, his sons, these are the tribes known after their names. This is specifically being written to the sons of Abraham through his descendants. This is not the worldwide thing. So again, we never have a straight across kind of a way of saying, well, as it was with them, so it is with us across the board. These are people who are supposed to be God governed. The closest thing we would have them to them is the church and not a particular nation. So these were supposed to be governed men. Their king was supposed to be a godly man who leads them, and the priesthood is supposed to be the ones who minister the godly things to the people, and they're supposed to walk in accordance with God's written word. That's how it should be, yet we see it's the polar opposite of that. Now, the people stand up, oh my people, those who lead you, cause you to err and destroy the path of your, the way of your paths. Now look at what he says here. This is heavy what he says. The Lord stands up to plead and stands to judge his people. This is where it gets real for them. So as they read this, that just, and you can get this in your mind's eye. You can see the idea. All of this is happening, and then God stands and says, now it's time for me to speak. This is what I'm going to do. I'm adjudicating this. I am the judge, and I will put these things in motion. So once again, these things that people thought they could do with impunity, now God weighs in. So he stands to do this. Now, verse 14, the Lord will enter into his judgment with the elders of his people and the princes. That's where it begins. The kings and the people who are under them, those are the people who are ultimately responsible to him first and foremost for the condition of people. The priests also, that's going to be an issue as well. He'll enter into a judgment with them. For you have eaten up the vineyard, and the plunder of the poor is in your houses. What do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the faces of the poor, says the Lord God of hosts? That was something expressly prohibited in the law, that the rich would oppress the poor. In this case, the very kings themselves are plundering the things of the poor and taking it for themselves. And here God says, who do you think you are that you would do this? This is completely the opposite of everything that God would have ever instructed them to do. So this matter is incredibly serious. So you can see here, God stands as judge, and the people who are in the firing line are them. Now, of course, he has plenty to say in the other prophets, and he'll have plenty to say in this book about the prophets and other people. There's so much that's still to go in this. In verse 16, he turns his attention more now to the women. Look what he says to them. Moreover, the Lord says, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and that's just they're self-exalted, or they have been exalted by society, but they've bought in, because they are haughty and they walk with outstretched necks, and there's just kind of the idea of being immodest. It's that puffed up. And the outstretched necks is just kind of supposed to be more of a kind of a look at their posture. If they already are self-exalted, it's the way that they carry themselves. Though some of the references here are a little bit ambiguous, it would probably be known very well to them, because how did they dress? How did they adorn themselves? What was their posture? All that stuff would be more of a societal thing, probably better understood by them. But we certainly get the picture of this. So he says, they walk with outstretched arms and they have wanton eyes. And again, here's one of those things. What does that mean? It can mean a couple of things. It can mean that they're all decorated. We think of, all the makeup and everything else, or it's just the look that they have about them. That there is that look of covetous, of desire, of whatever it may be. It's the glance, or it may just be the way that they decorate the face, is could be both of those things, actually. They wouldn't necessarily be independent of one another. So, walking and mincing as they go, making a jingling with their feet. So, again, all outward pretense and things, adorning themselves in such a way that all the attention is on them. The way that they walk, the sounds that are made because of it, the jewelry that they wear, the eyes that they have, the outstretched necks, their self-exaltation. So he talks about women who are really made up, and it can mean just that these are the people who are the elites and they have everything, they want to show it off. It could mean that they're even more seductresses too. That could also be a part of it. Again, the language leaves a lot of open things because it's said very generally. So therefore, the Lord will strike with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will uncover their secret parts, their nakedness. So when this all comes to pass, all of these women who had all of these things, when it's all stripped away, it will be as though their hair is removed and they're having to be paraded naked through the streets. It's the total polar opposite of all of their adornment and makeup. He's saying everything that you are, you will be the complete opposite when all of this comes to pass. And verse 18 says, "Now in that day the Lord will take away the finery, the jingling anklets, the scarves, the crescents, the pendants, the bracelets, and the veils, the headdresses, the leg ornaments, and the headbands, the perfume boxes, the charms and the rings, the nose jewels, the festal apparel, and the mantles, the outer garments, the purses, the mirrors, the fine linen, and the turbans and the robes." And many of these things really kind of helps you to realize that we're probably looking at a lot of even foreign influence that's taken place by this time. Certainly the idolatry is foreign, because that was completely forbidden from the children of Israel, though all that stuff had come in. So it would make you wonder how much of this would have been with them in the 40 years in the wilderness. So would they have had a whole group of people like this with all of this finery and stuff? Really, again, if you think about it, it's kind of left behind because of all of the successes of the earlier kings and guys like David and Solomon. But by this time, things are really in a pretty messy condition. So, however that may be, here he basically says all this stuff, this, I would say, collection of things that they had kind of incorporated into just their day-to-day of things among their elites, probably has a lot of earthly influence of the foreign nations. And again, this is an interesting repetition that is, of how much purity there would have been of the first church. But look at the corruption of the modern church, if we want to make an application here, and how much stuff is borrowed from what is non-biblical things and from the culture of all kinds of different ways, all kinds of different countries, all kinds of different traditions, and all the rest of it that have nothing whatsoever to do with the actual genuine scripture. So interesting how that's kind of the same problem that we have now that they had then. The idea that the devil will always look to corrupt what God makes as the perfect or as the ideal. Verse 24, "And so it will be." Here's what is going to happen. These are things, remember, as I already mentioned, it's not as though this could happen. God is speaking about these things as already having taken place, though they have not even begun to happen yet. "So it shall be, instead of a sweet smell, there will be a stench. Instead of a sash, there will be a rope. Instead of well-set hair, baldness. Instead of a rich robe, a girding of sackcloth," which is a way of just recognition of mourning, of course, being very, very uncomfortable. "And then a branding instead of beauty." And so just all these different things. The complete polar opposite to each thing is what they will get in exchange for it. Remember, all of this is because of what we read in verses 8 and 9. "Jerusalem is stumbled, Judah is fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord to provoke the eyes of his glory. The look on their countenance is a witness against them. They don't try to hide it. Woe to them," as he says, "for they have brought this evil upon themselves." So once again, his point is, all of this is going to happen to you because you've brought it upon yourself. What have they done? They have abandoned him and they've gone after foreign gods. That's what we know by reading so much more of this as we go through it. That's ultimately the thing. But they're openly provoking, shamelessly, God, and in all the things that they're doing, they don't even try to hide it. So this is why it's going to take place to them. "Your men will fall by the sword, and your mighty in the war. Her gates shall lament and mourn, and she being desolate shall sit on the ground." An interesting, kind of metaphors, if you will, that are put there. Mainly when you start to look through it, what took place as we looked around Israel when we were there, it was, you're just seeing ruins all over the place, and the plunder that is taken place through the ages of Jerusalem, from this time here, whether it was the Babylonians, and the Babylonians gave way to the Persians, who really allowed them to go back and kind of rebuild. But then the Persians were conquered by the Greeks, and the Greeks oversaw the area. Israel was always a vassal to some other nation after Babylon. And then the Greeks giving way to the Romans, who ultimately destroyed it again. So then all that happened, and that wasn't the end of it. You look all around Israel and you see mosques and you see ancient Muslim edifices of things. The whole Temple Mount is covered on the top by Muslim conquest, and it's gone back and forth through the ages. But you just see that the nation, or I'm sorry, the city of Jerusalem, with some spectacular stuff. I mean, gosh, you're looking at every single day when you go there, you're looking at ancient ruins constantly. You're looking at it all over the place. And yet you can say this city is harmed. This city is broken, because it's certainly not what God had intended. That was a place where his name would be known. And instead, it's been just crushed under again and again and again by all kinds of foreign nations, and they've left their mark on it. So it's as though you see, and what we have here in this last verse is kind of, if you could take the city itself and put it into like human form, it's broken and it sits there. And you can see its brokenness. That's said in verse 28. Her gates will lament and mourn. And the gates would be where the judges would sit. It's where the people could go to have their cases heard. It's where the right things should take place. Think of how many times we read in the book of Proverbs that wisdom cries out in the gates. It's the place where you would say a healthy city would have everything in operation the way that God had wanted it. It was a place of commerce. People could come in and out. It was a place of safety. There were supposed to be righteous judgments that were making there. Instead, those things are broken down. And it says, they lament and mourn, and she, being desolate, shall sit on the ground. That idea of, you just see a person who is so overwhelmed and broken that all that they can do is sit there. And that's kind of the picture that's being illustrated here. So again, the city has been, I got to say it, when I go there, every time something new has taken place. And even though it's a nation for the most part that doesn't really seek the things of God, his hand is on that place everywhere you look. It is incredibly successful, and his hand has been upon those people. When you start to look at what took place even before World War II, and the things that were starting to take place in Israel, the people who were getting together and recognizing that they couldn't trust the foreign nations, there was a real sense of belonging to the place before World War II even broke out. And there were people in operation trying to defend the place, and you could see God's hand in it. But when wars broke out, and the three major ones that we always bring up is 48, 67, and 73. If you go back and study those things, and you see what the numbers were and what they had for their armaments and how things were going, and at times there is no reason to believe, just under common sense, how they should have ever survived as they did. And yet miraculously, not only did they survive, they thrived and they took back land. It is an amazing thing when you study the history of that, and there is no rational explanation for how that happened aside from the supernatural hand of God. And anybody who would try to come up with an alternate view is really going to struggle to try to make that case, because it just defies explanation. And we see it all there. We see it every day when we're there. So anyway, you look at this, and this is exactly what took place. Everything that God said would happen, it happened just like it's spoken here during the days of Hezekiah, after the days of Hezekiah rather, but during the Babylonian captivity of Nebuchadnezzar, comes in and conquers and takes most of the people back to Babylon, and that captivity lasted for 70 years, through the Babylonian Empire into the Persian. And so it was the Persian king Cyrus who ultimately let them start coming back and bankrolled it, basically, gave them the ability to go back. And that happened under Zerubbabel, and that would have happened after the 70 years were over. And it wasn't because they got their act together. It's because God said it was going to be 70 years. And they come back and they don't do what they're supposed to do, even though they can say God said he was going to send us back. By the time that Nehemiah gets there after Zerubbabel, he comes back and he's just heartsick at how little has gotten done in his time, waiting for that all to happen under Zerubbabel. He was furious when he saw what was going on there. So again, they didn't have their act together, but God brought them back using earthly sources, using pagans to underwrite the project and give them the ability to do it, and they were still in a place of rebellion. So a lot of interesting parallels today that many in the church don't even want to recognize. But really, really interesting when you go there and see it with your own eyes. A lot of this stuff kind of makes sense. So we're going to wrap up there, and we'll save chapter 4 for next week as we get back together. And I want to cover this matter about Jesus being a socialist. And again, when you read, I'm going to have something to read for you, which I think you'll find kind of comical. In fact, let me get it out here because I wanted to quote it accurately. But this is one of many places, one of many people that you hear that says this. Mainly, there's a few things that are going on, and it's really always said because of political reasons. And it's people that just can't stand a conservative side of things, and they're very liberal in their view, and everything should be provided. Well, you can't make the case that Jesus was a socialist, and I'll show you how that is. But here's the mentality, and here's how this usually goes down. And again, I could have read excerpts from just about anyone. I'm not even going to give it attribution because it's only a portion of it. And she's just one of many people that tries to make this silly case. Listen to what she says. If Jesus showed up today in Trump 2.0 America, so that tells you where we are, he wouldn't be rubbing elbows with conservative politicians or holding court at a CPAC event. And that's the Conservative Political Action Committee. He also wouldn't be standing outside Planned Parenthood screaming at women, nor would he be lobbying for tax cuts for billionaires while shrugging at the rising homeless crisis. You can just see what a kook. This is a person who's just trying to take all kinds of their own pet political things and make Jesus their champion for it. This is hilarious. No, if Jesus came back today, he'd be flipping over tables at Wall Street banks, railing against the cruelty of for-profit health care, and reminding every self-righteous lawmaker that love thy neighbor wasn't meant to be an optional guideline. These people are hilarious when they start to do this. They start to quote the Bible, but they don't care anything when it says something that disagrees with them. This is like that saying, if you torture the Bible long enough, it'll say anything you want it to say. Yet somehow, in this dystopian version of reality, the loudest voices calling themselves quote-unquote Christians have transfigured Jesus into a capitalist, nationalist, gun-loving conservative who hates immigrants, adores trickle-down economics, and thinks social safety nets are the devil's work. These people are so insufferable. It's just funny to listen to. So, of course, she doesn't try to make a biblical case for this. She just basically says, if Jesus showed up, he'd be like I want him to be. So let's see if the Bible really kind of agrees with what she has to say. Let's look at a couple of things. There are some proof texts that they love to point to, and let's take a look at a couple of those first. Let's turn to Luke 19 because they love this one. And then we'll point out the logical fallacy that's in this because it's pretty comical. So let me get to it here real quick. Luke 19. In verse 1, we get this. Now, then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Now, behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. So he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd, for he was short in stature. So he ran ahead, climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he saw him, and he said, Zacchaeus, make haste to come down, for today I must stay at your house. Imagine being that guy. He's wanting to get a look at who Jesus is, and Jesus calls him out by name. Something obviously is going to interestingly happen here. So he came down, received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he has gone to be with the guest. This man is a sinner. Why? Because he's a tax collector. Okay. So Zacchaeus stood and he said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor, and I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. If somehow I've made an error, I will refund it to them, and with interest. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he also is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which is lost. Now, so here they love to point to this, because here is Zacchaeus, and he gives, of his things, he gives it to the poor. Well, in Matthew chapter 22, let's go there. And in verse, let's see, 20. Let's go at verse 15. Let's just read the whole thing. So then the Pharisees went and they plotted how they might be able to entangle him in his talk. So here are the Pharisees wanting to try to give him a question that either way he answers it, there's no way out. Now, here's what he says. So they said to him, their disciples So they sent to him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and a teacher of the way of God in truth, nor do you care about anyone, for you do not regard the person of men. It's kind of a mischaracterization, but okay, great. They're setting the table up, and of course they've invited the ones that if he said the wrong thing, Herod would hear about this. So here these men are in league with people that they think are fodder for hell, right? Well, verse 23, Tell us therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money. And so they brought him a denarii. And he said to them, Whose image and inscription is on this? And they said to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, Render therefore to Caesar those things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And when they had heard these words, they marveled, and they left him and went their way. So, as far as Jesus being a, quote, socialist, that tells us the world in which he lived. It was the Romans. The Romans didn't have a welfare system for the Jews, so Jesus wouldn't have understood a social, system like the people, like this person here who wrote. It just didn't exist in his world. So what we have is rather they were to see to one another. So let's go back to what the law had to say. The law would tell you that you take care of the widows and the orphans, the people who cannot take care of for themselves. But notice it was done within the people. It was not some government edict, and it wasn't taken from someone and given to someone else. It was voluntary among the people to do what was necessary to help their fellow person. So it wasn't a government, and it wasn't socialism. It wasn't a handout kind of a thing, and it wasn't a social safety net. It wasn't intended for everyone, because if anybody could work, they didn't get those kind of things. They were expected to work. It was only supposed to take care of the people who could not take care of themselves, and it was only within the people who were part of the children of Israel. There was no government that would take taxes and redistribute it to someone else. That whole mentality didn't even exist there, nor was the structure there, nor was it there in Jesus' time. The Romans were not taxing the people of Judea and Samaria and of Israel itself and then giving them something back to take care of the needs of the people. That was not what Rome did. Rome took the plunder of the servile nations and took it back to Rome. They didn't care about what people had. So that's why we see in the first church what was going on there. Well, let's turn to the book of Acts and let's see what, quote, socialism would have looked like. So in the book of Acts, we start at chapter 2 rather. Let's start there. There's only 2 chapters that we'll be looking at here. And this is right after Pentecost. Peter preaches this message. Thousands get saved. And it tells us in verse 41, Then those who gladly received his words were baptized, and that day about 3,000 souls were added to them. Then they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, the fellowship, in the breaking of bread, and in prayers. Fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. Now, all who believed were together, and they had all things in common. They sold their possessions and goods and divided it among all to anyone who had need. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and in breaking of bread, house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all of the people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. Notice, who is providing for the needs here? It's not the government. It wasn't that they were being taxed. They voluntarily took of their own things. If they had stuff, they would sell it to help take care of the people who did not, because the government wasn't doing it for the people. This is how the church should be able to operate, yet the government does not help the church function in this world, and the church will never have the resources to take care of the needs of the people as it should be. So the church is able to help in its own groups, if that church, I mean, if the people who are in genuine need, the church can help those people. But it's not some silly utopian thing like they talk about here. Let's look at chapter 4. Chapter 4 of the book of Acts is similar to that in verse 32. In chapter 4, verse 32, it says, "Now the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and of one soul. Neither did anyone say that any of their things that he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. And with great power the apostles gave witness to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. Nor was there anyone among them who lacked, for all who were possessors of lands or homes sold them and brought the proceeds of them to those to that which was sold. And they laid it before the apostles' feet, and they distributed each one to his own, to anyone who had need." So it was an in-house thing of taking care of the needs of the people in the church, a very small group of people, because the government couldn't do it and wouldn't do it. So they wouldn't, maybe they could have, but they wouldn't have never done that. The Romans did not care about the Jewish people. In fact, they looked to exterminate them at one point, not too far down the history from this. So this small group of people saw to their own needs because the government never would. So all these people that say Jesus was a socialist, well, was he really? Did he advocate for taking something from someone else and giving it to someone else involuntarily, and that the government would be somehow overseeing all of that? If Jesus was a socialist, that's how socialism works. You have a group of people, nobody has more than anyone else. You take from those who have and you give it to those who do not have. It's involuntary, and it's done by the people who are in power. All of this was done in fellowship in the early church because of a desire to do it. People would say, I have been blessed, I'm going to take care of those people of my own belief. And it was within the church. That's it. It wasn't a system like we see in the nonsense of socialism today. There's not a place on the planet where socialism works. And the people who live well under socialism are the ones who are in control of it, but everybody else only has shared misery. Everywhere where it's ever been tried, that's the way it is. Look at the countries around the world that trust or that follow the socialist or even the communist view of how things should be, and it is a disaster. Look at what Solomon has to say in Proverbs about the lazy person, the one who doesn't work, doesn't eat. That's all throughout the Old Testament. No one was expected to just coast. Everyone was supposed to provide for themselves and not look for someone else to do it. So, this idea that Jesus was a socialist, you don't find that in his teachings at all. When a man said, "What must I do to be saved?" to Jesus, he said, "Sell everything that you have and give it to the poor." Great. That's not socialism. That is really living according to the law, that there are people who cannot provide for themselves. You have the things to provide for them, so why don't you go sell what you have and make up that need? That is not socialism. That is basically the children of Israel seeing to the needs of one another. It doesn't work in a country, and it never works when a government's in control of it, because governments are corrupt. So, again, the idea that Jesus was a socialist, that's fanciful. It sounds great on paper, but it doesn't wash when you look through what the text has to say, nor do you see Jesus advocating for socialism as we understand it. Give everything to the government, or a large portion of what you have to the government, and let them redistribute it to everyone else. So, again, people love to quote the Bible because they don't know it. They think that they do, but if anybody ever took the time to read through it, they would understand that they genuinely don't understand what they think that they do. So how do you answer that? Was Jesus a socialist? First of all, tell them, give me your best evidence of how that's supposed to work. And every instance that they will give you, you're able to say, well, if you really look at that closely, it was not government-supplied socialism. And it wasn't mandatory, it was voluntary. God asked them to do it, but we could see that they were genuinely not doing it by and large. In the church age, even less so. The church saw to the needs of the church, and it was not even something quite as straightforward as the law made it. It was actually codified. It was in the law. Here's what you do for the widow and the orphan among your people. Well, the church, the principle's great. Let the church take care of its own people, but let the idea that somehow Jesus would have said, yeah, give your money to the government and let the government redistribute it to people because they'll do it equitably. How ridiculous. when governments are so unbelievably corrupt, the idea that Jesus would advocate for that just shows how silly people can become, because they just genuinely don't know anything about what the scripture has to say, and then they write silliness like this. So anyway, just thought it'd be kind of an interesting thing to go through. If you encounter those people who say Jesus was a socialist, tell them to prove it, and then look at what they have as their evidence, and it's pretty comical. So gave you some examples there. If you have any questions on any of this, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, I hope that you will become one. We put out content multiple times a week. Bible studies are Old Testament on one day of the week, Mondays, and New Testament is on Thursdays. And then we put out a couple of topical, basically shorts on YouTube, like what I just did here about his Jesus being a socialist. We put those out as their own little shorts, so they're easily kind of bite-sized, and you don't have to go through and find where they are in the main study. So we do kind of those things in combination. You have any questions about anything that I've covered, you can contact me through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net. And I love hearing from the listeners or the viewers. We can also have you comment on the YouTube channel if you have questions that you'd like to have answered in there. So until next week, we get to chapter 4. I look forward to sharing that with you when we get together next Monday.